What's going on, everyone? It's me, Lone, and let's talk about legendary weapons in Fallout 76. Now, first and foremost, I'm speaking a bit softly because my wife is asleep in the other room and I don't want to wake her. And secondly, if you found this video in your recommended or suggested feed in YouTube and you're not subscribed to me yet, I would really appreciate that subscribe, especially if you enjoy my videos or find them helpful. I know YouTube is a little bit different nowadays, but I'm still trying to aim for that 100,000 subscribers, and we're getting there. We're on a good track, and I would really appreciate your support. So thank you so much if you do go on to subscribe. Alrighty, so legendary weapons. I'm in a fair few forums and Facebook groups for Fallout 76. It's part of my job, but I also just enjoy seeing what people are saying about the game, what they're posting, and one thing in particular I enjoy looking at is the kinds of legendary weapons that people post, whether it's just to ask whether it's a good legendary weapon, whether it's for people looking to trade their legendary weapons. I like to see whether there are some that I would want to actually purchase for caps or trade for my own armor or weapons or whatever it is. But from time to time, I do see some posts, particularly from like beginner or newer players, where they'll post a picture of a legendary weapon or two or whatever it might be, and they'll say, you know, is this worth anything? Is this good? Can I trade for a certain weapon or a certain piece of armor? And sometimes those legendary weapons that they're posting just aren't the best suited, whether it's for, you know, end game meta or whether it's for trading in the Fallout 76 trading community, especially from the newer and beginner players. And this is not a bad thing. It's just because they are new or because they're still learning the ropes of the game. Sometimes those weapons just are more intended for scripting at a legendary script machine than anything else. So I wanted to create this video to try and outline the kinds of legendary effects and attributes or prefixes that are really good in terms of trading with other players, using for your own character, or just kind of keeping around because you never know when you might need it. You know, you might want to create a new character one day and then you've got a really good legendary weapon that you can use for it. Or someone on the internet might say, hey, I want to trade this really cool legendary weapon that you want in exchange for one of those legendary weapons that you held on to, even though you didn't have a use for it at the time. So in this video, I'm going to be going through all of the legendary effects in Fallout 76, including for melee and ranged weapons, and just generally breaking down which are the really good ones, which are the just good ones, and which are the ones that you can fairly comfortably script, you know, especially if your carry capacity is not too flash. So again, if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate the subscribe, but for now, let's get into all of the legendary effects for Fallout 76 weapons. Alrighty, so I grabbed all of this data from the Fallout 76 wiki, which is linked in the description below for credit. They just so nicely lay out all of the legendary effects and their descriptions, etc., and even some useful notes, which I will go through in a second. So please check that out because the information there is so invaluable and it really does even help me from time to time. And what they have here are the prefix modifiers for legendary weapons and then the major and the minor modifiers. So essentially what these mean is that when you see a 1-star legendary weapon in the game, these are the kinds of legendary effects that you'll see: anti-armor, bloodied, executioners, etc. But then when you get 2- and 3-star legendary weapons, you'll start to see these effects, these major and minor modifiers. So the goal, I guess, is to try and get the best possible 3-star legendary weapon, because then you're getting as many legendary effects as possible. But that's not to say that a 2 or even a 1-star legendary weapon is going to be bad. It really just depends on the effects. Like for instance, there are some bloodied or junkied 1-star legendary weapons that are still sought after, but of course, if you can get them in a 2-star or a 3-star form, that will always usually make it much better. So yes, 3-star is the goal, but that does not mean 1 or 2-star is bad. Also as well, I want to make it clear that what you really want to be keeping an eye out for are weapons that are of max level. So in short, if a weapon is either level 45 or level 50, you know for sure that it's max level. Just because something is level 45, it doesn't mean that it is available in level 50, right? If it's level 45, it means that for that weapon, it is of max level, and the same goes for level 50. So then you might find weapons that are like level 35 and level 40 and stuff like that, and they definitely have a use, especially if, you know, you're creating a new character, or if you're not level 50 yet or level 45 yet. So don't think that they don't have any value, but they don't have as much value as weapons that are of max level. Those are the ones that are really going to help you when it comes to like endgame stuff or wanting to trade with other players, etc. So make sure you keep an eye out for level 45 and level 50 weapons. That's going to ensure that you get max value for those weapons. Alrighty, so let's start with the prefix modifiers in Fallout 76. Again, these are your anti-armor, your bloodied, your junkies, etc. The main legendary effect that you see when it comes to every legendary weapon in the game. Now, I want to try and explain the color coding that I have going on here. This is purely based on my personal opinion. I've highlighted the legendary effects that I think are incredibly good, or god tier you might say, in green, and then the ones that are good or even great I've highlighted in yellow, and then the other ones I haven't highlighted at all. Now you might disagree with my characterization or my colors here, just based on your experiences or the characters that you have played with, but this is just very rough, and I will admit some of these yellow ones were definitely borderline, like it could have gone either way just depending on the weapon itself, and it's very hard to categorize one legendary effect for all kinds of weapons because some are automatic, some are semi-automatic, some are melee, you know what I mean? So this is just a very rough guide, so please keep that in mind. But we're going to go from top to bottom in alphabetical order and just explain all of these legendary effects and, you know, explain which are the really good ones and which ones are the good ones, and give some nuance when it comes to certain different weapon types in the game. So anti-armor. Anti-armor is typically one of the best legendary effects that you can get in the game. It means that your weapon will ignore 50% of your target's armor, but this only applies to physical and energy damage resistance, not radiation or poison resistances. So I would say that behind bloodied and junkied, anti-armor is probably one of the best legendary effects in the game. So even as a 1-star, they can be very good. So definitely keep an eye out for anti-armor. It's definitely a great legendary effect. Of course, especially when it's 2 or 3-star. Assassins, it's not as highly sought after in the community, especially because it's just an increase of 10% to players and not like, you know, NPCs or like not NPCs, you know, humanoids in the game or other creatures in the game, because it's just applicable to players. It's not as valuable as other legendary effects in the game. So definitely has its place for PvP, but when it comes to PvE especially, not so much. Berserkers. Berserkers is in yellow. People have said that Berserkers is just a kind of a worse form than Bloodied, or of Bloodied. It definitely has its use, and I've seen people, you know, ask absolutely for certain Berserkers weapons, especially if they're 3-star. So it means that you deal more damage the lower your damage resistance, and it means when your damage resistance is 0, that you get plus 50% damage. So there are certain builds that you can really utilize Berserkers weapons. I would say it's definitely not as good as Bloodied, but they have their uses. So especially if you get a 2 or 3-star Berserker's weapon, maybe not a 1-star, but especially 2 or 3-star, I would keep an eye out for it. I would search for it online and just see whether people are trading for it, or see if it's good for your build. I would say that for most beginners, that Berserker's is probably not the best, because it really just cripples your damage resistance. Of course, you can have more health because you're not a bloodied build, but with really, really bad damage resistance, you might find yourself dying even more than bloodied. But some of you might disagree. It just depends on your experience. So bloodied. Bloodied is probably one of, if not the best, legendary effects in the game, next to junkies, I would say. It means that your character does more damage to lower your health, and the goal is to get your character below 20% health, because it means your weapons do 100% plus damage. As you can see, that's more than most, if not all, of these other legendary effects when it comes to damage output, and that's why Bloodied is so good, and it pairs so well with like Nerd Rage and an Adrenal Reaction, I think the mutation is, just a bunch of different stuff in the game, unyielding armor as well. That's why Bloodied is so highly sought after. You can probably get the most damage output possible when it comes to Bloodied legendary weapons, so of course they are the best, but most of you probably know that. Double. Now these no longer drop in the game. I'm going to cover quad in a second, but double just means your weapon has double the ammo capacity. Now, because they don't drop, you're not going to see them when you play the game. You're not going to pick them up, but you might find them in a trading forum. But I would say quad is the more applicable one here, because you can actually get them in the game. So we'll move on from double. Executioners, you do more damage when your target is below 40% health. Now, I have this as white, but there is a use for executioners, especially against the Scorchbeast Queen. Let's say, you get the Scorchbeast Queen down to 50% health, or lower than 50% health. Oh, sorry, 40% health, I should say. You just pull out your executioner's weapon when she's below 40% health, or even when any really hard enemy is below 40% health. And that means that your weapon is doing plus 50% damage, which might be better than your regular legendary weapon. So executioners definitely have a use, but the reason why I put it as white is because you'll find with most enemies in the game, you're killing them very quickly anyways. So executioners only really has that benefit more so against the harder enemies when you're getting plus 50% damage more often than, when you're not getting it, when your target is above 40% health. So definitely has its use. And that one could have gone yellow, to be honest, just because of its use against like the Scorchbeast Queen and enemies like that. But I just put that as white, but just keep an eye out for them, 2 or 3 star especially. Exterminators, you do more damage against Mirelurks and bugs. It's okay if you're really focusing on Mirelurks and bugs for certain events, for instance, like Heart of the Swamp would be a good one for exterminators, but not one of the best legendary effects in the game. Furious. So Furious means that your damage is increased after each consecutive hit on the same target. So it's plus 5% damage per stack, 9 stack maximum for a total of plus 45% damage. And there are some nuances when it comes to Furious weapons, like if you miss a shot, not if you miss a shot, but if you hit another enemy, that it might actually reset your damage stack. But Furious, especially if you're focusing on one enemy, they can get very good. So that's why I put Furious at yellow. I would say that Furious is one of the really good mid-tier legendary effects in the game. Ghoul Hunters, you do more damage against ghouls, not as highly sought after, to be honest, and I think the same goes for Hunters as well, doing more damage against animals. Generally the ones that are very focused on like certain creature subtypes, like ghouls or Mirelurks or animals, they tend to be not the most highly sought after or useful legendary weapons in the game, so that's why they are in white here. Instigating, so you do double damage if your target is at full health. This is one of the good kind of mid-tier legendary effects in the game, especially when you have semi-automatic or even like melee weapons, but they do have a use for automatic weapons as well. Just keep that in mind too. It's hard to explain why, but instigating does have a use for auto weapons. So definitely keep an eye out for those. Again, especially if you're a melee build, because you could probably one-shot a lot of enemies just because you're doing double damage when they're at full health. Might be a bit harder if you're doing an event and there's a bunch of people everywhere shooting at enemies and they aren't at full health all the time, because this only has use when it's at full health. But when you're on your own and you're sneaking around and you're, one-shotting enemies because they're at full health, that's when it has its most use. So, Junkies. Junkies is, I would say, just a little bit behind Bloodied, but it's still very good. Like, it's one of the most highly sought after legendary effects in the game. So it means that your character deals more damage with the more chem withdrawal effects that you currently have. And the max goal is to get 5 or more addictions to chems, so you get plus 50% damage. Junkies is very highly sought after. It can be very good in the end game especially. That's why you see them being traded for such high amounts. So absolutely Junkies is one of the best legendary effects in the game. Medics. Medics means that your VATS crits will now heal you and your group, but only with the ranged weapons. I've seen some people really like Medics weapons just to heal their teammates and be a good team player, but I've kept it in white because in terms of damage output and like end game versatility, probably not the best. Mutants, your damage increases by 10% if you're mutated. A lot of people are mutated in the game, so everyone would find a use for mutants weapons, but it's only a plus 10% increase to damage, so definitely not comparable to some of the other legendary effects in the game. Mutant Slayers, again, this is one of another subclass legendary effects, so you do plus 30% damage to super mutants, so again, not as good. Nocturnal does increasing amounts of damage as the night grows longer, but less damage during the day. Now, especially because nowadays the days last longer in Fallout 76 than the nights than they used to in the past, Nocturnal is something that you can, even if it's like 2 or 3 star, you can usually comfortably script a Nocturnal weapon. Maybe beforehand they had more use and the night times lasted longer, but nowadays probably not. So Nocturnal is definitely not one of the best legendary effects in the game. Quad, so you have quadruple ammo capacity only with ranged weapons and no explosive or black powder weapons. So this legendary effect just means you can keep shooting and shooting and shooting without needing to reload as often. So it's definitely one of the good legendary effects in the game. Probably not like top tier or god tier, but definitely has its use. Stalkers, if not in combat, plus 100% VATS accuracy at plus 50% AP cost. Not one of the best legendary effects in the game, so I'll quickly move on from that. Suppressors reduces your target's damage output by 20% for 3 seconds. There is a perk which effectively nullifies this legendary effect, and I would say that it doesn't have the most use unless you're like versing the sheep squatch that does so much damage to you with its laser beam that maybe a suppressor's weapon to reduce its damage output would find some use there, but generally I would say not. I would say that suppressors is one of the lower tier legendary effects. Troubleshooters, you do more damage to robots. Again, this might be good in the encrypted event when you're versing the sheep squatch and all of those robots, especially Troubleshooters armor, and maybe I'll do another video about legendary armor later on. I have a full set of legendary armor, Troubleshooters legendary armor, just for that event, and I'll equip it and it's so much use. But when it comes to weapons, maybe not so much. Two-shot. Now, two-shot, if you're an older 76 player, you know that they were probably the best legendary weapons in the game. Nowadays, not so much. Now, it doesn't mean, because your legendary effect says shoots an additional projectile, you might think that it means you do double damage. Not so much. Now, of course, your weapon is shooting that additional projectile, but what it means, as it says here, is that each projectile has a base damage that is 62.5% of the base damage of a projectile from the normal weapon, which means that overall, it is 125% of the base damage, not 200%, not double. So definitely still good, but not as good, as it used to be, for instance. Vampires, the reason why I put this in yellow is because, especially for automatic weapons, vampires can be very good. I used to rock a vampires build, and you don't ever need to use stim packs. You don't ever die. Very good against I keep mentioning the sheep squatch, but in the encrypted event, vampires is very good because you're just constantly healing every time you hit an enemy. It can be very, very effective, but not so much for melee, not so much for one-shot weapons. So I've just kept that in yellow. It's definitely not a top tier effect, but it still has its use. And finally, Zealots, plus 30% damage to Scorched. Again, not the best legendary effect, so that's why it's in white. So let's talk about the major modifiers next. So Bashers, your bashing damage increases by 40%. Generally, you don't want this as a second star or a second legendary effect, because you want to be doing your damage by using a weapon properly, like shooting it or swinging it or whatever it might be. Well, it's not for melee, but you get the point. You don't want to be using bashing damage to try and kill your enemies, especially because it's very slow. So that's why that's white. Explosive, one of the best major modifiers, so it means that your bullets explode for area damage, and that's 20% base damage. It no longer appears on energy weapons, which is important. You got some really amazing legacy explosive energy weapons out there that are very highly sought after, but you're not going to be picking those up in the game. Also, as well, using the demolition perk card increases the explosive damage here, so maxing that out, it gets you max possible damage when it comes to an explosive weapon. I rock a bloodied explosive weapon, so I get a lot of use out of using demolition, the perk card, or demolition expert. But yeah, explosive is definitely one of the best. Hitman's plus 10% damage while aiming. Not the best, but it's a nice little damage boost, especially if you get like a bloodied or a junkied and you have that extra 10% damage. definitely good, don't throw it away, but explosive is probably better, for instance. Lucky, VATS critical shots do plus 50% damage, especially if you're, this is one of the ones where I thought, oh, that could be green, depending on your build and depending on your weapon, but especially if you're a VATS user and you have a lot of VATS perk cards, Lucky could be a good addition to one of your legendary weapons if you find it. But yeah, it could be yellow or green, to be honest, just depends on you and your build. Rapid, definitely one of the better ones, 25% faster fire rate. Now, I should explain, while this doesn't increase the amount of damage each of your bullets do, because you're firing more bullets, you're getting a higher DPS. That's why Rapid is so good. That's why it's so highly sought after, especially when it comes to automatic weapons, for instance. Again, you're not doing more damage, but you're doing the same amount of damage faster, so your DPS is better. So I definitely would say if you get a faster fire rate legendary weapon, definitely something to hold on to, do some searching to see if it's a very good weapon that would be traded for. But Rapid is amazing, especially for automatic weapons. VATS Enhanced, another one that could have gone either way for me, whether yellow or green. You get plus 33% VATS hit chance, which is nice to ensure that you're getting those VATS hits. I was tossing and turning between those VATS ones, but if you're a VATS build, definitely keep an eye out for Lucky or VATS Enhanced. Now when we come to just melee weapons, you have melee speed, so 40% increased swing speed, and then power attack damage, 40% more power attack damage. Both of these are incredibly good. If you get these on a melee weapon, it's a very good major modifier, especially if it's bloodied or anti-armor or junkied. I would probably say that probably melee speed would be the better one over power attack damage, but they're comparable. It is very hard to say. My vote would be for swing speed, but you are not losing out if you have power attack damage. It just means that, of course, you need to use more power attacks, which drain your AP more. So keep that in mind. This one, riposting reflects 50% of melee damage back while blocking. Not the best. You want to keep swinging your weapon, you don't want to be blocking too much in the game, and that's only when it has its use. So definitely that's why I've left it in white. You definitely want one of these other major modifiers when it comes to melee weapons. And crippling. Crippling is not the best major modifier. It does apply to both ranged and melee. You notice that these were just for ranged, these were just for melee, but crippling you can have on a ranged or a melee weapon. I would say that if you get it, it's nice. It's not the best, but it's something that you should keep an eye out for. I've been speaking for so long. Now, finally, minor modifiers. You'll find as well it's very hard to speak clearly when you're trying to speak softly. Anyways, starting off with Lucky, your VATS critical meter feels 15% faster. Again, especially if you're a VATS build, especially when paired with VATS Enhanced or with Lucky up here, very, very good legendary effect. You find those weapons that are bloodied or junkied, and one of these and then that one, amazing. They sell for so much, just depending on the weapon as well. So definitely keep an eye out for this legendary effect. Nimble, faster movement speed while aiming. It's not that good. I have it on my bloodied explosive 50 cal, and I wish I had something better. It's definitely one of the ones that you're happy to skip on one of your ranged weapons. Perception. Now look, I will say that all of the legendary effects for the minor modifiers that just increase your special stats aren't the best. They're fine, you'll take it as a third legendary effect, but you probably want something different. The one exception might be strength when it comes to melee, but I'll get to that. But for the other ones, I would say it's nice, again, if you get it, but try and look for a different third legendary effect. Rapid, faster reload. That can make a weapon god tier in a second. Getting 15% faster reload just means you're in the action for longer. It technically increases your damage per second. Especially good for heavy weapons that reload very slowly. Rapid is amazing. Here are some of the okay or good ones, the not best ones. You've got Resilient, so it's plus 250 damage resistance while reloading. Again, good for a heavy weapon that slowly reloads for you. But because it only applies when you're reloading, maybe not the best. And some weapons don't reload that slowly, so it's only giving you a benefit for that very, very small amount of time. I would say Steadfast is better than Resilient because you get plus 50 damage resistance while you aim. So if you're always aiming, you're always getting 50 more damage resistance. So it's not one of the best ones, but I think it's definitely a yellow legendary effect. VATS Enhanced, 25% less VATS action points cost. Very good. If you get one of these again with one of those other legendary effects, you'll have a very, very good weapon on your hands. Now let's talk about melee. Cavaliers, there are two Cavaliers here. I think they're both labeled the same. So one of them you take 15% less damage while blocking, the other you take 40% less damage while power attacking. Now this power attack one would of course pair well with the power attack damage major modifier, but for a melee weapon, I don't think you want either of these, and I don't think you want endurance. For a melee weapon, what you really want is +1 strength, because as you know, melee damage in the game is tied to your strength stat. The higher your strength stat in the game, the higher your melee damage is. So that +1 strength just gives you a little bit more damage. That's why people that use melee weapons really seek the +1 strength. But also what they seek is, I'll skip agility for a second, lightweight. So lightweight does apply to melee and ranged weapons. So lightweight is very good, I would say, for melee weapons, especially if it's a very heavy melee weapon. It's very good for like heavy guns that weigh a lot. It's not one of the best third effects that you can get, but still decent. Like you'll take a 90% reduced weight weapon, especially if it weighs a lot. And then back to agility again, that's one of those special attributes that you'll take it, but probably not the best. And finally, very quickly at the end, I wasn't planning on doing this, but I want to give some very quick combinations for like incredibly good weapons that you should definitely keep an eye out for when it comes to Fallout 76. And this is just off the top of my head, but I want to give a bit more guidance just in case I wasn't clear with explaining all of these legendary effects in the game. So let's say you have a 50 cal. I'm a heavy guns user, so I can really explain 50 cals. Let's say you have a bloodied, explosive, and a rapid fast reload 50 cal in the game. That's a god tier 50 cal. And an incredible weapon that you really want to try and get in the game if you're a heavy guns user, right? Or let's say if you want to rock a Fixer, the Fixer, which is a really good rifle in the game. Let's say you have a Junkies, rapid, and faster reload Fixer. That would also be a god tier weapon in the game, something that's really good. If you want to get more of a gauge in terms of certain different legendary effect combinations when it comes to weapons, and in terms of how much they're valued and how good they are, check out the link in the description below to the Fallout 76 price check website. It's a very good sanity check just to let you know roughly how much other players in the game are purchasing certain weapons for, because if they're being purchased for more caps or being traded for very good weapons or armor in exchange, then it means obviously that it's very good in the game. So it's a very good website that I like to use to sanity check any of the weapons that I might pick up in Fallout 76. But I'll give another example. Let's give a melee one as an example. Let's say if it's a Deathclaw Gauntlet and it's anti-armor and it's power attack damage and it's +1 strength. That's probably another very, very good weapon in Fallout 76. And one more, I'll say a hunting rifle. Let's give a single shot weapon just for the sake of it. Let's say it's junkied, explosive, and your VATS critical meter fills faster. That would also be a very good legendary weapon. Of course, there are better single shot weapons in the game than a hunting rifle, but it's just to explain, like, not all of these legendary effects are applicable for some weapons in the game. Like, let's give an example. Whereas 90% reduced weight might be very good for heavy guns, it might not be so good for rifles that weigh barely nothing, right? As another example, let's say faster reload might not be as good for weapons that don't have the slowest reload time in the world. You might want to get a different third effect, like especially if it's a one that utilizes VATS very effectively. You might want to get this, or you might want to get VATS enhanced. So Again, it just depends. Use that price check website. I find it very useful myself. But enough babbling, let's get to the end of the video. Alrighty, that is all from me, Wastelanders. I hope that this video was as useful to you as possible. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions, and until next time, this has been the Lone Vault Wanderer. Please take care of yourselves, and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight.